We think this is going to be a very productive morning and an interesting one, and we hope you will find it as such. Greening Greenfield decided to do this as an extension of the master planning process. About 7 years ago, the town of Greenfield determined that it was going to cut energy usage by 80% by 2050. It's a pretty impressive task. And as we're now in the master planning process, which is really geared to the next 10 years or so, we thought it was important, as we're doing that discussion, to also look at the broader picture so that as we're making decisions for the master plan, we don't have to go back in 10 years and redo them because we weren't thinking about sustainability effectively enough. So this is an opportunity to look more broadly at that question for the next 37 years and to try to figure out what we think should be there. As you may notice, there's nothing here directly dealing with energy. And it's because energy, although it's been a part of what Greening Greenfield has done in terms of encouraging people to weatherize their homes and to do a whole lot of work in other ways around energy, around such things as transportation. Energy infuses everything we do. And how we use energy is going to be important in terms of this whole process. So we're discussing that. The energy component is kind of built in, and we hope that you will infuse it in all the different places. That being said, we've asked each of our speakers to respond to this question. What do you expect a day in your professional and personal life would look like in 2050? And how do we get from here to there? We have 4 folks who have come to speak on a number of different topics, and we hope those will give you some thoughts to think about and some, and you don't have to agree with them, very honestly. We hope that there's a little bit of disagreement so that we can have some good discussion. I'd like to start off with Joshua Hornick. Joshua is the 11th and 12th grade math teacher at Four Rivers Charter Public School, which is right here next to GCC. He also teaches an elective in science and law. He has a law degree from the University of Chicago and once practiced law on Wall Street. He was one of the founders of Community Capital Bank, in New York City's first community development bank. He earned his master's in science education from the City College of New York and is certified to teach secondary math, physics, chemistry, general science, and bilingual social studies. And he has taught in 8 different secondary schools and at Holyoke Community College. He was a founder of North Star, the self-directed learning for teens, and co-directed North Star for its first 7 years of operation. And Josh is also a professionally certified executive coach and trains coaches at the Coachville Center for Coaching Mastery, and he will be discussing education in schools. Josh?
Many of you have probably seen this quote, education is the lighting of a fire, not the filling of a bucket. And I want to suggest that it's both. Okay? That if you can light the fire, that is to create certain attitudes or habits of mind, filling the bucket becomes very easy. But as we look at what education is going to look like 37 years from now, we want to take a look at both of those. Okay. Now, I pulled this out, I guess part of the technology of the world. I decided I wanted to add this morning, so I added it from my phone in bed this morning. I took a picture of it, and I shipped it over and put it in my... And this comes from Daniel Pink's book, A Whole New Mind, which is one I'll recommend and be referring to a fair amount here. And I just want to talk about the notion that we've gone from an agricultural age to an industrial age to an information age to now 21st century we're in something which he calls a conceptual age. Others will call it an inspiration age. But the educational system we have was constructed in the industrial age and was largely set up as a factory model. And I can tell that this group grew up with that educational system because I saw the seats fill up from furthest away from the podium up to the front, as you will in any classroom which you attend. So the old model, which still dominates a lot of schools, the factory model of education, it's dehumanizing, it focuses on bucket filling, not lighting fires, and it takes the human being and fits it to the machine, which was typical of the industrial era. And it did support our, the prosperity, the material prosperity that we now enjoy. It also supported making people more uniform, which was another one of the principal reasons we set up the system the way we did 140 years ago or so. But we're past that, but we still use that system, which is basically a factory model of education. Now that we've reached the industrial age, that we've moved into the information age, we're still using an industrial age system largely, and it's largely worked because a factory model is fairly effective in delivering an education which is linear, which is sequential, information-based, analytic, functional. The skills which were important in the 20th century. And what I'm going to explain is how the skills that were important in the 20th century, though they're still important now, are expanded. Okay? So as we move into our current age, what students need to get out of education is broader. And we can accommodate that now owing to just different technology in the classroom in terms of how classrooms are set up and run, and computer technology and information technology that we have. So I'm going to address what this is going to look like and what it looks like as it's starting to come out now, both in terms of its content, that is the filling of the bucket, the types of skills and knowledge which are necessary, and in terms of the cultural shift, the attitudinal changes, and the structures which will support that. So I want to say a little bit about how 20th century education is outdated. Okay? First is it had a lot to do with getting information. Getting the information in your head was important, and it's still important, but now there's too much information for us to get into our heads. We can't ask students to get the amount of information which is now required into their heads. And if we try to do it, it'll make students crazy. So the amount of information is too large and growing to expect people to be able to hold it. Okay? And the decisions that we make about the information which we include in the curriculum is racist. It's cultural centric. When we decide that students need to know about one author or one piece of history or one piece of science rather than another, it's really fairly arbitrary, and the decisions are made based on cultural biases, which disempower some and empower others. Okay? And information is now held very easily by computers. The amount of information I can pack into this, is just extraordinary. And what I can't pack into this, I can access from this. And so the need for information is a little bit less, and the choices around information are arbitrary. Now, it's not just information, though, which is becoming pedestrian or not as important to know. It's also analysis and analytical skills. Computers are really good at analytical skills. And the things which were important for success in the 20th century, knowledge, what we'd call knowledge workers, aren't so much what we need now. We think of the skills of the 20th century, being able to analyze things, being able to store large amounts of information. Increasingly, computers can do those. Dan Pink talks about it in 3 ways. He says that 20th century education has become obsolete because of Asia and automation and abundance. That is to say that most of what you think of the quintessential 20th century job, the accountant. Well, increasingly, people will do their taxes on TurboTax, which is getting better and better. and if it doesn't already, will know more than most accountants know. And so you don't need the accountant for that. And if you do need an accountant, you can hire an accountant or a lawyer or a medical advisor in India, which will cost much less. So that's Asia and automation. And then there's abundance, which is a slightly more subtle concept, but it's just as important. And that is that people don't stand for just function anymore. The example which Daniel Pink likes to give is when he went to Target to get a bathroom brush, a toilet brush, and the brush he brought home was designed by a world-class designer. Because people demand more than function now. It's part of the abundance of the world we live in. People are looking for an experience. People are looking for design. People are looking for something more than that. And if you don't have that as part of what you learn through your education, you're not going to have the skills which are necessary for the 21st century. Okay. So Daniel Pink includes 6 senses which he thinks are the next generation of what students need to learn. So this is when I'm talking about the content. So he talks about design. We need more than function skills. We need to be able to design things which are beautiful or engaging. We need more than just being able to make a good argument. We need to be able to tell a story. We need to be able to develop what we present. There's so much information. We need to be able to do more than argue, because other arguments will come and battle ours. What we need is a narrative which is engaging and the ability to bring things into a narrative. Symphony is the notion that we have to take different instruments or different pieces of information and put them together as a skill. Whereas focus was more required in the 20th century. Focus will still be required, but it's a matter of being able to take my focus here and my focus there and join them together into something which is greater. The empathy is, well, you all know what empathy is. At least the people who are sitting in the front do. But empathy is we need more than we need more than information. We need to understand what the impact that has on people and have sensitivity to that. And play, we need to be able to do more than work. We need more than a good work ethic. We need a play ethic, because people are more successful when they're successful at play. People are more successful at work when they view their work as play. And meaning, we need more than accumulation. The focus of 20th century, again, growing out of the industrial era, was our success was a matter of what we were able to accumulate and create, kind of a physical prosperity that way. But increasingly, people are demanding, young people now demand meaning, not just accumulation of things. So these things need to be taught. So that what's taught in schools will more and more grow to reflect these items, these senses. Okay. And I want to say it's underway. It's happening. You look at schools like the Center for Inspired Teaching, which is in DC. When they talk about the 4 things they want intellect, inquiry, imagination, integrity. Okay? Well, imagination and integrity have a lot to do with empathy and storytelling and design. Okay? And where I work, at the Four Rivers Charter Public School just down the street here, we have our SWLTs, our school-wide learning targets, which include, being critical. You take someone who's a critical thinker, creative thinker, and a problem solver. That relates to being able to design. And maybe Ben can be talking about design later. Okay? But we talk about communicators. We talk about stewardship, which has to do with sustainability and being able to see things together with symphony. We talk about good citizens, which has to do with empathy, which has to do with a range of different types of the 21st century skills. We're acknowledging that these are the things which are necessary. Okay? And teachers need to change to be able to do this. The nature of teacher education needs to change. Teachers need to become masters of those types of skills. Okay? Now, I want to change course for the second part of what's going to be changing. And that is to talk about the culture which will support these types of changes. And because if you try to teach 21st century skills in a 20th century environment, it doesn't happen. You know, I guess if you try to imagine a classroom full of kids sitting in rows with their hands crossed learning about creativity and design, it doesn't function well. The overall culture needs to change. Okay? And there are two elements of the new culture which I'd like to draw a picture of for you. First is extreme academic individuality or choice, and the second is a melting of school walls in a way that integrates family, community, and I wrote experts also. And we see elements of this growing now, and they will grow dramatically in the next 30 years. Okay? With respect to extreme academic individuality, I'd say that it encourages humanity. It encourages people to be who they are, which is what gets people excited about life and excited about learning and motivated about learning. And the other things I said, don't think classrooms. I'll say a little bit more about that in the next slide. But we see it already. I want to see where we see it starting to happen now. First, we see it in differentiation. Are any of you teachers out there by profession? Okay. How many of you hear the word differentiation on a daily or weekly basis of you? Okay. If you don't, you'll hear it more and more. Okay. And how many of you heard that in the classroom 10 years ago, the term differentiation? Okay, okay, we got one here. Okay. But it's something, the importance of differentiation to allow for individuality is growing and growing. And it's going to grow more and more, partly because of the availability of computers. When I'm talking computers, I'm talking Web 2.0. I'm talking about computers where you can say something to them and it'll say something back to you which is intelligent, okay, or appropriate for what you're trying to learn. And we use that type of technology now. My 11th grade math classes, half of it's done on a computer, because a computer can watch the progress of every one of the kids in my class, where I can't do that. Okay? Increasingly, we find availability of content cheap, free, and very well presented, such as at the Khan Academy or Saylor.org, which provides college classes. There's all sorts of open source and free materials which are they're not making teachers obsolete, but they're forcing teachers to go to a higher level to be able to deal with the type of six senses I discussed earlier. Okay? And there are a couple of models out there right now which provide or allow for or encourage the type of extreme academic individuality that I'm talking about. And I think of North Star, which is in Hadley, and the Sudbury Valley School, which some of you may be familiar with. I have a long quote from a student at the Sudbury Valley School, and I don't have time to share it with you now. But it mostly talks about how they don't have classrooms there and that they learn outside the context of structured classes. So after extreme academic individuality, I'd want to talk about the melting of school walls, which has two pieces to it. One is the leveraging of real relationships, which are important for people to find meaning in what they're doing. I'm going to tell one story which is going to take a minute, then I'm going to zip through the rest of it because I've gone past the time I said I'd take. But I want to tell a story I heard 10 years ago about a middle school in the Midwest. And they had to tear down the old middle school because it had asbestos problems. And they built a new school, and through some fluke, the entire new school burned down 3 days before it was supposed to open. Just a row of bricks running around the edge of what it was. And it was all covered by insurance. They were able to build a new school, but it was going to take 3 years to do that. And they needed a place to have their middle school. So they looked around the community, and they had, the only place they could find was a warehouse. But the thing is, it was an active warehouse which had trucks coming and going in it until noon every day. But they had no other location. So they had to set up a middle school which started at noon and ran till 6:30 every day. And all the teachers said, this is impossible, we can't do this. But they had no choice, so they did it. And 3 years later, so for 3 years they had this late day middle school. 3 years later, the new school was open. 75% of the teachers refused to go to the morning schedule. So they ended up having split schedules. And now half of this is for the reason you'd expect, that middle schoolers don't wake up until about 10 or 10:30, so they're at their best in the late afternoon. But the principal reason they did it was unexpected. And that was parents got out of work at 5 o'clock and their kids weren't at home, so they didn't go home. Instead, they came to the school. And the school had a huge infusion of parental activity. And that's what the 75% of the teachers said that they couldn't do without. Okay? So I think that what we're going to see is a melting of the school walls, okay? Which includes parents coming into schools, experts from the community coming into schools. At North Star, more than 70% of the classes are taught by people who aren't full-time teachers. You know, they're people who are interested in what they do when they come in. They've got a passion about what they do. Okay? Not that teachers don't. Okay? And increasingly, you'll get kids out of the school. Okay? At Four Rivers, where I teach, we have enough mini buses and vans so that we can take a grade of students out. Anytime I want to take students away for anything, I've got the facilities to do that. Okay? And we encourage getting students out and into the community as much as possible. Okay? The other thing which has to change, this will be the last thing I mention, is the criteria for hiring and for college acceptance. And we see this changing with the large growth in homeschooling. Many people thought that homeschoolers wouldn't be able to get into colleges because they don't have a transcript. And the uniformity of transcripts is going to disappear because people are going to be doing such radically different things. So there will be standardized tests, and we see these as competing kind of directions which we're heading in right now. But homeschoolers do very well in getting into colleges. North Star probably has better college acceptance than any public school in Western Massachusetts. Okay? And the kids don't have a transcript. So how do the colleges assess them? And the point is that they need a different measure for assessing people for what they're going into other than the school transcripts, which used to mark them before. And I think that we'll see that that'll be the case in hiring for jobs as well as for college admissions. So the bullet points of what I've said is that the content is going to make a change toward the right brain, including the 6 senses, which I discussed before about Daniel Pink, and that we'll see a new culture of extreme academic individuality and a melting of school walls. Last point, it's not going to be neat. Okay? It's going to be messy because things are going in all different directions. And there are going to be huge political battles, and there are going to be all sorts of complications. And I look forward to seeing that when we get to 2050. Thank you.
So we have some ideas of some changes happening. And I think that it is a challenge, and there are things you may like, and there are things you may not. And I think it's important to talk about those things. And now I'd like to move to healthcare and introduce Donna Stern, who is both an RN and an MSW and has 20 years of professional experience in health and human services. Her experience includes inpatient psychiatric nursing, crisis intervention, intensive case management, employment training, residential services, and domestic violence prevention and intervention. While a research assistant in graduate school, she immersed herself in public policy and community organizing, and her interest in public policy and community organizing has continued as a nurse union activist. She is a member of the Massachusetts Nurses Association, National Nurses United, and serves as the co-chair of the bargaining union at Bay State Franklin Medical Center. She is currently staff RN at BFMC, where she has been working for over 7 years on the inpatient psychiatric unit. Donna.
It's really great to be here, and it's truly an honor. And I just want to say, to start off, that I'm not speaking on behalf of my employer, Bay State Franklin Medical Center. I'm speaking as a nurse. I'm speaking as a resident of the town of Greenfield, and I'm speaking today because I live and breathe healthcare, and I live to take care of people. So I just want to say that to start off. So let's talk about healthcare, where we are right now. What kind of model we have currently. Some of this is going to sound familiar to some of you, and some of it may be brand new, especially if you haven't interfaced with the healthcare system as we know it. So let's talk about what it looks like. Right now, healthcare is a commodity. Bottom line, it is no different than selling used cars or new cars. And every single one of you sitting there and up here has a price tag right on you. And that's a very hard thing for me to say as a nurse, but it's important for me to say it because you need to think about that if you have to come into the healthcare system, depending on whether you're coming in as a loved one or actually coming in as a healthcare user, a consumer of the healthcare services. So what does that actually mean? Well, there are people who actually deliver the healthcare. Those are the nurses, the doctors, the people that work in the different settings, radiologists, surgical techs, that actually went to school to take care of people. That's what we went to school for. That's what we believe in. We want to help you heal. We want to help you get better. And then there's the competing interests of that goal. And who are those competing interests? You're looking at private health insurance companies. You're looking at executives, hospital executives, high-cost administration, who have a different agenda about what healthcare looks like. And if your bottom line is to make profit off of people's healthcare, then that's what's going to drive you. That's what's going to drive your decisions. And if you look at, if that's what your goal is, then what's the most expensive cost for a hospital, an insurance company? It's labor. That's the most expensive cost. So when I talk about where we are currently as doctors, as nurses, it's frightening. My job, I spend more time away from the bedside than I ever have. And why is that? Well, because it's about providing a service that's, in their mind, cost effective. It's about lean production, so slowly but surely getting rid of nurses at the bedside, dismantling the practice, making it harder and harder for doctors to become primary care physicians. So if you look at a doctor right now, for every 5 doctors that graduate from medical school, only 1 will become a primary care physician. And that is, we're at crisis level right now. And that's just in urban areas. So if we look at Franklin County, we already have a lack of primary care physicians. And so as a nurse, my job is to take care of you. And I want to do that. But right now there's a conflict on that end. So what does that mean for the future? If we continue at the rate that we're going, right now we are #1 in the world for health costs. We spend 2 times more than anybody else in the world. And we are 37th in the world in terms of health outcomes. So what does that mean for Franklin County? Well, it's not where we want to be. So the future is looking at what does Franklin County need. And I think the first step in that is looking at the needs of this county. And I think that we had a community forum a month ago, or 2 months ago, and out of that came a working group and of dedicated community members who are saying what's actually going on with our healthcare, what do we want out of our healthcare, and what are the actual needs of Franklin County. And I think that's the beginning process. If you're looking at, I want to have healthcare in the future, well, what do I need to do to make that happen? Well, the first step is you have to take it back, and you have to start on a local level. Most people say, well, the healthcare system is out of control and there's nothing I can do about it. And I don't believe that that is true. I believe that the process begins at a local level. And that's what today is about. Okay, if it begins at a local level, well, then what do we have to do about it? Well, we first have to identify what are the needs of Franklin County. And as a nurse, I can tell you what some of those needs are. This is one of the poorest counties in the state of Massachusetts. This has a large elderly population. This is a rural community, so it has accessibility issues, transportation issues. You have a high substance abuse rate in this county, large mental health population. So right there, you already begin to identify the needs of this county. So then, well, what do you do about it? Where do we go from there? And what do we need to do to make that happen? Well, then you have to look at, well, who's providing those services? And are we actually getting those services now? And the answer is no, you're not. And if that's the reason you're not, then what do we need to do to get those services? And I think that discussion is going to begin today. Because we can take it back. And I think there's a number of ways that you do it. You start with the working group, you start doing a health assessment of the community, partially, which was already partially done, but a more intensive view. And then you start holding the people who actually provide the care accountable. So you start looking at the hospitals, you start looking at the public services, and then you begin there. I think people say, well, we can't do anything, it's too big on a national level, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, for, let's say Elizabeth Warren, who just became a senator, she opens up her door, 6 health insurance lobbyists are waiting for her. So for every one congressperson, there are 6 lobbyists waiting for her. So do we have to look at our federal system? Do we have to look at how that all works? Yes, we do. But that's not where it begins. It begins at the local level. And I think if we don't stand up, then how you perceive nursing, how you perceive medical care is going to look very, very different. I went to a conference out in Las Vegas, and basically what I was told that if we continue at the rate in which we're continuing, my job is going to be replaced by a robot in 2050, because that's more cost effective. That's cheaper. And you tell me where the human element and component of robotic care is. Do I think that technology is important? Do I think medical advancement is important? I do. But to replace me or to enhance your care? And right now we have an abundance of waste, medical waste. Tests that are being done that shouldn't be done, huge administrative waste. And the most important thing to think about when we look at where we are currently is health disparities. Do you have access to health care today? And the question, and I think it really depends on who you are as a person, where you work. Do you have employer-based health insurance? Do you have public health insurance? Or do you not have health insurance? And everybody's experience in healthcare is going to be different depending on what you have. And I say that's wrong. Everybody in this country, everybody sitting here, should be able to expect high quality, affordable health care and not have to go into financial ruin because of it. And it's scary to say this, and this is like a 3-year-old statistic, but 66% of foreclosures in this country were caused by health costs that people could not afford. 60% of the people with health insurance are going into bankruptcy, and that's people with health insurance. So I say we have to take it back. And we're not going to all get on a bus and go to Washington, D.C. tomorrow and say, we're taking it back. Again, it starts locally. And what's great about what came out of the community forum is the working group has already begun. So I think we can do it. And I think today is the beginning of that process. And I really want to thank you for your time. And I love being a nurse, and I hope to continue to be a nurse in the future. Thank you.
We've been talking about the services and the processes that are involved in how we live. We also need to talk about the physical structures and the physical world that we live in. And we've asked Ben Weil to talk to us a bit about that. Ben is the Extension Assistant Professor of Building Energy in Building and Construction Technology program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He teaches and conducts research in energy-efficient building technology, policy, and management. He received a BA from the University of Massachusetts, an MA in history from Syracuse University, a PhD in environmental studies from the University of California, Santa Cruz. And he has worked as a consultant, building analyst, and retrofit installer in energy efficiency and renewable energy policy and engineering. He serves as a building energy expert advisor for EcoShift Consulting, Pear LLC, and several municipal energy and building committees. Ben?
But before we get to buildings and energy, I want to point out that prediction is really difficult, especially about the future. So this is the turn of the previous century, and you'll notice that what they did is and this is Greenfield, and basically what somebody did was take technologies with which they were familiar in their time and say, oh, let's make them kind of bigger and better and more interesting. And that's what people do. The history of prediction on energy is abysmal. We are almost always wrong. And when we're right, we're usually right for the wrong reasons. In other words, we hit the right number, but the inputs were wrong. But we can do some things. We can create scenarios in which we talk about what our normative goals are, what we want, and we can realistically assess what are the trends that are on there, that are in place now, what are the limitations that are going to determine how we get to what we want. So, So what I'm going to say is going to be a lot more of a reflection of us, or at least me, and our time than it really is of 2050, but here we go anyway. So my normative goals for Greenfield, for the built environment of 2050, and really this would be everywhere, is regional energy independence, 100% renewable energy. So every one of these goals is achievable, and quite frankly is achievable with existing technology that we know about, which is why in some ways it's ridiculous, because there's stuff we have no idea what's coming. But we also want more regional interconnectedness and convenience of transportation. We don't want to be stuck, because energy is so expensive that we have to only go as far as we can walk, like our ancestors did. We want to move around. We want more options in housing, not fewer. We have lots of different lifestyles that suit lots and lots of different types of people, and we don't want to shrink that selection, but we actually want to increase it. And a lot of these things are going to seem strange. I want increased participation in civic life. I actually think that that's as important as the built environment, and we need to build an infrastructure that encourages and enables that rather than limits it. We all want a higher standard of living. Well, one big impact, especially at the lower end of the economic scale right now, is the cost of utilities. That fear of not being able to pay pay the fuel oil bill, but not being able to keep yourselves warm and comfortable, the vulnerability is an incredible impact, especially on people who are not as well off as many of us might be. That should be eliminated, and we can do it. And maybe this is because I will be elderly at this point, but I think the built environment needs to help with integration of the elderly into community life, so that the society gets to take advantage of all their wisdom. I hope that I have some by then, and that we don't just warehouse people and just kind of wait for them to die. And so that's stuff we need to think about. Okay, so where are we right now? This is based on Department of Energy numbers. So this actual distribution of uses, obviously you don't have to worry about the actual numbers, but you can see the biggest chunk of what we use in residential energy, and this, I'm using residential just because it's easy to relate to, but we could do this for all the other building types. The biggest chunk is heating. And then water heating, and then space cooling, and then a whole bunch of other things that we can get into. Now, the prediction from the EIA, the Energy Information Agency, which is not a bunch of stupid people, is that heating actually will reduce it as a proportion of what's being used and as a total amount. But the overall energy use still increases. And you look at this giant chunk at the top, that purple chunk at the top, that's other. That's where we put just, I don't know, we keep on getting more and more gadgets. It's going to start chewing up more and more. Well, that's a choice, isn't it? And that's a cultural choice. And part of the reason is that we have an attitude in this country that we've been building up maybe for our entire history, but certainly since the 1970s, of individualization and atomization, that we're all individuals, that it's all a war of each against each. And this is, if anything, this is our national philosophy. And yet, I think if you looked at this region, you wouldn't find that that is the dominant core value. And so there is this tension between individual resources and sharing of resources, and a sense of, I have to have everything for myself versus we can share things. So a lot of this waste in here is from lack of sharing. All right. So then my prediction for, in this, I'm using Massachusetts, but we'll think of it as Greenfield in terms of the percentages. My, not prediction, but realistic goal is that heating becomes a very, very small portion because, quite frankly, any new building, there's almost no excuse for it to have a big heating demand. You'll see that water heating decreases because we can get some efficiency, but we're going to have more people, and they're all going to want to take showers. So that demand is there, right? How we supply it with renewable energy is a different story. Space cooling, you'll notice it doesn't decrease that much. Well, there's more people. It's also going to get higher. One of the trends that is just baked in at this point is climate change is here. It's coming. It's going to get worse. We're going to have more and more cooling degree days, and humidity, to the degree that cooling is about reducing humidity as well as temperature, that's going to become a bigger and bigger and bigger problem, even as our buildings get better and better. But you'll notice that I made the other button, I made that little section kind of small, because that's a choice. And I'd like to believe that we could choose to not have various and billions of gadgets and tools take up a lot of our energy and time. So is this possible? Well, we've already done it, right? This is Wisdom Way in Greenfield. This isn't the very best of all possible green buildings for residential, but it's there and it's doable. And so these ones aren't net zero, but they're very close to net zero. And there are other buildings around the state and even locally here that really do hit net zero energy emissions, and net zero greenhouse gas emissions. Great. But this is a very individualistic model, right? Each one of these houses has to have its own energy production that matches its demand. Most of the buildings that you see today are going to be there in 2050. And they're not going to be this new construction. I believe that every single new building that starting from now, we could simply say it ought to be net zero capable. It ought to have a heating demand. You can keep it warm with a candle. For most of the time, that is possible, it's doable, and it's doable now. So another model is, okay, well, look, we've got this big reservoir of heat and cooling available to us in the ground. Everybody loves ground source heat pumps. People call it geothermal. Geothermal is not what this is. Geothermal is way, way deeper, and we're talking about, internal heat of the earth. This is basically solar energy stored over a long period of time and traded. But this model too, right? This implies every one of these houses has a big piece of land attached to it, and big expense, lots of digging, And every single one of these houses does it themselves. Okay, well, maybe we drill deep holes, right? Those are not cheap to drill. And again, you got to have the land. You got to have the buffer resource that's available for that. So this is still an individual model, even though you're more efficiently gathering energy using heat pumps from the earth. But why not share? Why not have places where we have waste heat that we can dump all the time when we've got the waste heat, or solar heat in the case of this place in Manitoba that exists, that we can do now, where they charge the soil with solar energy all summer and they draw it out all winter, and they share. Different houses are going to acquire different amounts of solar energy, but as a community, they all get what they need. District energy, district heating and cooling, very expensive. Or you're going to dig up the roads? We're digging up the roads anyway. Come on, we can put these in the ground. Do we know how to do district heating? This is the UMass Combined Heat and Power Plant. We know how to do it. Is it the very best way we could do it? No, but in 2050 we should be doing better than this. But this is probably the most sustainable thing about UMass, is the high efficiency with which it produces heat and electricity from the same plant. Transportation, of course, once we've gotten our buildings to be very, very efficient, we've retrofitted, all the measures that we're putting in now in existing buildings, those ones are going to be up for renewal by 2050. We're going to make those much more efficient. My own house was built in 1790, and I've basically retrofitted it to, I don't have any solar panels, so it's not net zero, but if I did, it would be a net zero house. So this is technology we have now. And it doesn't have to be out of the world, but transportation's another story. How are we going to replace oil? Biomass is not going to do it. There's simply not enough photosynthesis at the rate that we need that we can get it on a sustainable basis. But we have lots and lots of waste, and so we need to produce the waste heat to dump into that communal pool as a byproduct of producing electricity. And I know it's controversial to say it in Greenfield, but biomass is part of that answer, because when it's done very, very efficiently with very low emissions, and you use all of it for heat and electricity, so your waste is very, very small, it can be cleaner, greener, and better. So can we electrify transportation? Well, here's the Nissan Leaf in 2012. It's charging up, and for most trips that most people have to do, that'll do it. And we're pretty good at this. Oh yeah, in the mid-1990s, we had the EV1, and it had a pretty good range, and people were charging that up. And wow, we have been doing electric cars for a really, really long time. And in fact, most of the reason they didn't compete had nothing to do with whether electricity was a good way to move you around. It had to do with subsidies and competition that was very, very heavily subsidized in favor of the internal combustion engine. But this is still an individualistic model, isn't it? Every single one of us needs to own a big hunk of metal that's going to get us around. The efficiency, I bet in this crowd, a bunch of us got here in Toyota Prius or equivalent. Am I right? I got here in a Toyota Prius, and even that fairly efficient thing, only about 1% of the energy that went into that car moved me here. The rest of it was to move the stupid thing here. Well, so why do we all need that to move around? For most of our daily activities, most of our desire to get from point A to point B, why do I need to own a car that's sitting in my driveway when I'm lucky enough to ride my bike to work and my wife isn't driving the car somewhere? It's just sitting there. Why? So we have Zipcar, right? We have models out there already about how we can share, but we need to even more radically share. And again, it's nothing new. We had a network of electrified trolleys all over the valley that went up into the hill towns. You could get from here to Boston all on public transportation, affordably and conveniently, but we need to make them convenient, frequent, pleasant, going to the right places, reuse these rights of way that still exist, but also that it's not a lower class thing, right? It has to be something that normal people do, right? Everybody. Well, of course I'm not going to get in a car. Where would I get one? It's so inconvenient. There's a trolley right there, and I can get to where I want to go. This is completely doable, and it's, again, sharing that resource. And now we've electrified this transportation, and instead of using 1% of the energy to move us around, we're using a much, much larger percentage of that energy. We've thought about that here, too, more recently, right? So we're already making ourselves more interconnected and setting up. In other words, this isn't that hard. We're already on that path. So we have population growth that's going to affect what we can actually do. And one of the things we see is, yes, school-age children are going to increase as part of the population, but not nearly as fast as us old folks. And again, we can try and figure out a way to just warehouse all the old people in some sort of place waiting to die, or we can actually build our infrastructure so that the transportation is easy for people to use all over, so that they're integrated into the schools, so that teaching is a lifelong thing, so that people building relationships is available. All of this is infrastructure, because if you put a nursing home way out in the middle of somewhere and you have to have some sort of bus to get them from somewhere to somewhere else, they're going to stay there, and they may develop lots of wonderful relationships among themselves, but we will be missing out on their contributions, and that seems like something that we ought to be aware of and build in preparation for. So I want to go back to this projection, right? So that the Energy Information Agency has a bigger usage and I've got smaller usage. You notice that space cooling has not decreased very much. That's because it's going to get hotter. Even if we stopped all greenhouse gas emissions today, it would still continue to get hotter overall. But and we are right now on the higher emissions scenario. In fact, this is kind of old data, and it's actually been superseded. And quite frankly, the higher emissions scenario looks more like what the low emissions scenario would be, because things are progressing faster. So this is for Boston, but but by the period we're talking about 40 days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit here in New England. So we're likely to have summers that are more like North Carolina now, like North Carolina is now, which in some ways is not that bad, right? I mean, it could be a lot worse. We're in a very lucky position, but we're going to have they live in cooling. They get in their air-conditioned car, go to their air-conditioned office, get back in the air-conditioned car, back in the air-conditioned house. They never breathe fresh air. That's how they live. In fact, the growth of population in the South is largely due to the fact that in the 1970s, air conditioning became available, and all of a sudden, you could have a business down there and not sweat buckets and take a siesta. Well, the other thing is that we've got increased weather-related electric grid disturbances. And what does the air conditioning depend on? Electricity. So we need to build microgrids. We need resilience in our local electricity system, just so we don't have people die, because the number one hazard-related cause of death is heat, currently. So we have climate change causing more storms, more grid disturbances, and more heat all at once. So we need to think about that. So this is a picture I took 2 days ago, sorry, in Northampton. Okay, it's Northampton. This is about, what's the quantity? It's about half a hectare of snow that's been moved around from the streets and piled in a vacant parking lot, and it's about a few meters high. Now, if we had put insulation on top of that, it would still be about 5 meters high. So that is roughly, I'm going to forget the quantity I calculated, but it's if we were to save that and use it for cooling in the summer, just the snow that fell, that would be roughly 550-something thousand gigawatt hours of electricity equivalent. Snow that just fell, and we just let it melt. But we spent a lot of effort moving it around. Let's just cover it up with some wood chips and save it and do a heat exchanger to it, again, to our shared resource, this shared distributed district cooling system. All right, so here's the frequency of heat waves. Again, cooling is important. This is frequency of heat waves basically when my parents were growing up, when they kind of were hitting the job market and all that sort of stuff. basically not that frequent. Yes, the desert was still hot. So this is the low emissions scenario, and remember, this is out of date. All right, we are not on this path. All right, but it's getting pretty hot in around America, but you'll notice it's not so bad here. This is really the scenario that's more likely, given the trajectory we're on. Everywhere, we are talking 75 to 120 days above 100 degrees Fahrenheit per year. But if you look at our little sliver, it's a little worse, but it's not like the rest of the world or the rest of the country. The bluer you get on this map, the more population and growth there has been. See a pattern with those two things? It's getting hotter, unbearably hotter, at exactly where we've been dumping more and more people. This is Maricopa County, where Phoenix is, and they've received people from us, and there's been a lot of growth recently with the housing downturn. There's been some people leaving, but that's where the growth is. And I want to read a quote from Will Du Bois, who wrote a great book called Great Aridness. Consider then heat, drought, windstorms, and fire as the four horsemen of Phoenix's apocalypse. As it happens, though, this potential apocalypse has a fifth horseman as well. When one day the U-Haul vans all point away from town and the people of the Valley of the Sun clog the interstates heading for greener, wetter pastures, more than the brutal heat of a new climate paradigm will be driving them away. The breakdown of cooperation and connectedness will spur them along, too. This is what they brought when they went there. They liked the green from Michigan and their lawns. And so even though they were in a desert, they did not adapt to the desert. They adapted the desert to them, and eventually that is probably what's going to drive them away from where they are. And I'd like to suggest that some of them are coming here. And the question is, do we set up a infrastructure that allows us to grow in a way we want to, and they get incorporated into our vision of the future? Or do they take it over and we become them? This is a pretty good place. And in a sense, all we have to do is hold on to it and plan well for how to make it fit more with actually what is probably a typical vision for people who live here now, given the things that are coming.
So we've got some stuff to think about our infrastructure, about our services, about our education, but we've got to eat. And we've asked Abra Dresdale to talk about that. Abra Jordan Dresdale is the Farm and Food Systems faculty at Greenfield Community College here. She is certified in permaculture design from the Austin Permaculture Guild and completed her master's degree at the Conway School of Landscape Design, where she co-authored Feed Northampton, First Steps Toward a Local Food System. Abra is the principal of Feeding Landscapes, a company specializing in edible landscape design, and she's a founding co-partner of Tomorrow's Harvest, a community food systems consulting business. She is coordinator of the new Farm and Food Systems degree program here at GCC and advises the Permaculture Club on campus and serves as the garden coordinator for the college's new Living Laboratory Permaculture Garden. Abra has taught permaculture design courses at Permaculture Feast in Northampton, Southern Vermont Permaculture in Brattleboro, Vermont, Wesleyan University, UMass Amherst, and Greenfield Community College. Abra.
It's so nice to be here. I was here until 8 p.m. last night working in my office and turned right around to come and meet all of you here. So thanks so much for gathering today at GCC. So I want to share with you right now a message I got from a time capsule last night while I was late working in my office. I traveled 100 years into the future and found this little document that I want to share with you all here today. After decades and decades of trial and error, hunger and obesity, struggle and innovation, the people of Greenfield triumphed. It was the year 2050, and everyone had fresh food to eat. How did this come to be, you might ask? Not only did the people change their ways of growing food, preparing food, and cycling the nutrients in their food, but more notably, there was a shift in the hearts, minds, and worldviews of the people. The words local and sustainable slowly left the people's lexicons. They were living and eating only sustainably and locally, so there was no need to differentiate. Likewise, being food secure was no longer a primary goal, since the people went beyond food security and became food sovereign. From the students at the schools, to the employees at the hospital, to the farmers living in the meadows, everyone decided how, where, and what food was grown and eaten. People were no longer considered consumers, passively munching along at the end of the value chain, but rather they had all become active decision makers and producers within their own food system. Young ones no longer asked, does salsa grow on trees? Or does milk really come from a cow? The songs the children learned and sang were about their place and its rich agrarian, innovative history. At a young age, everybody learned how to capture their own rainwater for drinking and irrigation, how to grow their own vegetables and raise their own meat, how to process and preserve fruits and dairy, how to hunt and how to fish. For the fish returned to the streams to spawn once again, and the elk and moose multiplied in abundance. Everyone knew the story of how their people triumphed in the face of peak oil, economic collapse, and environmental crisis. The shift arrived when people stopped seeing the world as outside themselves, as other. The people were humbled and listened to the fierce warnings of Mother Nature. They wisened up and decided to study the ways of their ancestors and the ways of the people indigenous to the land on which they were now living. No longer was there a psychological divide between urban, rural, and agricultural. Land was seen as land, all of it prospectively bountiful and inherently important. Food was grown on marginal land. Conventional farming gained companions as people learned about perennial agriculture, agroforestry, forest farming, rotational grazing of livestock, and biointensive cultivation. The town of Greenfield became a town in a farm instead of a few farms in a town. The people were swimming in food just as they were swimming in the Green River, and the food was flowing all year round. And how did they arrive in such a foodscape, rich with community and renewed natural resources? They first acknowledged they needed to reflect on their own hurts and notice how their hurts propelled them to turn around and perpetuate more hurt. Harm towards the land, harm towards marginalized members of their own community, harm towards themselves and their loved ones. The people started waking up and taking responsibility for their hurts and their own healing, and then realizing their power to become creators of their collective destiny. And following this first wave of healing and cultural repair, they started to get active. They received a community food project grant from the USDA. They formed a Franklin County Food Council, otherwise known as FC Squared, which guided new efforts and new ways of thinking about food. They reached for the Greenfield Food Study compiled by Greenfield Community College students. and began to implement recommended changes to strengthen their food system. School children became involved and demanded fresh food in their cafeterias and micro farms on the sprawling lawns of their school grounds. Doctors prescribed whole grains, fermented foods, and pasture-raised meats as preventative medicine. Corner stores became cornucopias of fruit and eggs and herbal teas. GCC became a revitalized grange where people could come learn how to homestead, start farms, and form value-added food businesses. The Franklin County Cooperative, or the Co-op, expanded to offer multiple cooperative enterprises, such as human-powered food distribution, downtown aquaculture for production of fish and aquatic plants, rooftop garden installation, and decentralized compost collection. CISA invested in a permanent marketplace for the new daily farmers market to be housed, where people could shop and farmers could vend rain or shine, June or December. Greening Greenfield partnered with the city's street tree committee and planted fruit and nut trees on the medians to offer public produce for all. The town planning board changed zoning to allow for chickens, turkeys, and goats, oh my. The mayor offered new tax incentives for residents to transform their chemical and fossil fuel guzzling lawns into victory gardens to show their allegiance for Greenfield's prosperous future. Just Roots expanded their operations to downtown, where their new urban farm allowed people without cars to learn farming skills and gain access to fresh food. Big Y and Stop and Shop became cooperatively owned. And the worker owners, who were invested in their local community, made a contract to source food from within a 50-mile radius and to eliminate all packaging from their products sold in the store. In order to be resilient in the face of drought, Regenerative Design Group invested in a keyline plow and veggie oil-run earth-moving equipment and installed ponds on hillsides and managed landscapes to infiltrate water. The Community Development Corporation acquired new properties up and down Wells Street and expanded cold storage using passive cooling methods. The CDC continued to offer business advice to startups who were committed to using healthy food produced in the Connecticut River Valley. And food was shipped and traded up and down the valley and into the hills using waterways and electric train transport. And in this green jewel of a town, Greenfield saw the bees returning from colony collapse disorder. Greenfield saw the children and their parents recovering from diabetes and heart conditions. And Greenfield saw the flourishing of new businesses, nonprofits, and community projects that cut across race, class, and political divides. People now lived in a beautiful, walkable, bikeable, publicly transportable community where food, water, fresh air, and a culture of respect and reciprocity abounded. The people of Greenfield remembered the hard times, the scary times when they thought they didn't have a chance. And they will continue to live to tell about how they transformed a broken world into a new Eden. Thank you.
And if there are people who would like to comment or ask questions,
First of all, I want to commend all four of you for presenting an astoundingly grand vision of the future. It was very informative, very concise, and I was very impressed. I guess my question and comment is, if you look in the room here, it's basically the usual suspects. These are the same people who've been doing this for years, and there's a very small crew. So the big, $60,000 question is, how do we get this out to the main community? How do we get this out to the 40,000 people that live in Franklin County? How do we get this more mainstream? Because this is a great vision, and yet it's not being heard yet, and it's no fault of anybody here. It's just, how do we get this out?
I don't have a concrete answer, but I will draw on some permaculture principles, and a couple being value diversity, redundancy, and slow, thoughtful solutions. And by that, I mean it doesn't happen, in my opinion, through one artery or one public forum. It's really about diverse, dispersed ways of personal activism, of personal communication, of showing up at the Stone Soup Cafe, getting the word out, coming to take a class at GCC, et cetera. And the more that we can all see ourselves as active participators in our collective future, the more we can see every opportunity to spread a vision of positive change. So wherever your personal leverage points are or community connections, I encourage you to foster those and nurture those and have it spread outwards.
Okay, someone else? Oh, you want to
I
go
just
ahead,
wanted
Ben.
to offer kind of a related idea. First of all, keep doing this, but just at different times and more conveniently. So this is kind of like from architecture, we have the idea of a design charrette, in which you present some ideas and then you get a lot of feedback and you redesign, and people then are bought into because they participated in the design of, say, just a building. So getting buy-in. To contrast, for instance, I drove on my way here. I saw a sign that said something about keep solar power plants out of residential neighborhoods. Like that's something people are, some people are really angry about or whatever. If you go to Germany, where there's solar photovoltaics everywhere, and there are wind turbines everywhere, the difference is that most wind turbines are owned by maybe 10 families in a particular location, just the one turbine, and they own as a small group these things. So ownership is important. I mean, I realize that's harder to do. One of the reasons that you see, when I go to town council meetings of some sort, when I can get there, it's only when my wife can watch the kid. And so if things are scheduled for the convenience of those who don't have a whole lot of responsibilities, they're not going to show up.
Your picture in the beginning, I think, is real. Monorails. I did a class here at GCC through Teresa Jones, Sustainable Energy. And mine was on maglev levitation trains, which means the trains are run with magnets. Right out there is an interstate, and I can see a train eventually going down that interstate, moving people at 200 to 250 miles an hour. How I envision it is, presently we're getting the train coming to Greenfield in 2014. That train can collect people on the way. Now, come Friday night, come Sunday night, I don't know if many of you people get over by a big Y corporation, but there's 50 million cars there who are skiers, who are summer people. Now, you think the skiers would like to be able to get to the ski resort in 2 hours instead of 6 or 7 hours? Sure, so they would take the train. They can load their skis, of course they can carry cargo on board, because I've did a major report on it. But also they can pull into Greenfield by just coming off the interstate with, it's just like a monorail, and just pull it into the train station over there. And I think it would be ideal for this community. And it could bring people into this community. I had fun with this project, and I think it could happen. I don't know what other people would think, but I think there is a potential.
So this is for Josh. Really enjoyed the talk very much, and I thought there was maybe a little tension between extreme academic individuality and the melting of the school walls. And I worry a little bit as a partly retired teacher after 35 years about really encouraging kids to think about their own voice and their own vision and their own way and all of that, which by the time they get into college or out of college, it's really their own wealth and their own protection from all of those hordes of folks coming up from Phoenix or from the drowning cities. And buying a gun, by the way, to protect yourself.
I'm not sure I got a question there. I appreciate your comment, though.
Academic individuality is saying to each kid, you know, find your own voice, your own vision, your own way, but how does that promote seeing the common opportunity or the common threat that we have if each kid is, you know, supposed to be coming up with their own way?
Yeah, I don't know. No, there's definitely a tension between the benefits of communitarianism and unification, which comes with having common beliefs and common visions, and the individualism which makes us what's the term that Maslow used to use? Self-actualized. I think there's a tension there. I think it's fundamental to the human situation.
The whole vision that and the mechanics of achieving it are very inspiring and encouraging, and it feels maybe it's doable, you know, within the county, within the Northeast area even, and I don't like to rain on the parade, but looking at the demographics that were given to us nationwide, which we have to face. I think you mentioned in 1970, air conditioning brought changes, and people started going south in the winter. Well, no, I mean, they could live there through the summer as well, but you know, people were going south. Well, all that part of the West that is having over how many days over 100 degrees, people will flee, and they will all be coming this way. And so I think we have to, you know, really stretch to think how we can address that, because there are some horrifying possibilities there.
I used to be just concerned about nature dysfunction among our youth, and now it seems like it's far worse, because it seems like our whole neurological system, at least for children, is being totally taken over by the high-tech stuff. And I'm wondering how that can be, how children can remain connected to nature and the rest of us, because that's the connection, the nature and all the rest of us, and this interconnection of beings, and how we can, I don't know, you may have some ideas yourselves, how we can work together somehow with that and the technology that seems so useful.
Oh, okay. Which is, I think infrastructure is a big part of it. Yeah, of course I would. But, you know, if you can't conveniently get out from your house to some sort of area of wild green nature to enjoy without your parents thinking that it's dangerous or without getting hit by a car, the infrastructure that allows people to move around actually allows them to have freedom. And I know, because I have a 9-year-old daughter, she really wants freedom, and we're not giving her as much freedom as we'd like to because we're afraid she'll get killed by a car. So the infrastructure actually can enable that. And then the other thing is, you may or may not be aware of a small organization called BioCitizen, which is essentially a summer camp and a program that goes into schools to make people bioregionally aware and give them lots of experiences out in nature. And I think that that's something that we can do at fairly low costs with high benefit. What's it called? BioCitizen. It's really small. Yeah, it's a really small organization. It's local. Like maybe it's West Hampton, I think.
May I add something? I'd say that I believe the principal answer to that question is it's a matter of good parenting and parents modeling a connection to nature and participation in nature. And if parents And if parents have a connection like that and live it and take their kids with them when they're little, as the Catholic Church used to say, you give me a child until they're 5 and they're mine forever. I think there's a lot to that. And if parents rear their children that way, I think that children will have that type of connection.
Though I think parenting is truly essential, I think you have to look at what is actually going on for the parents to be good parents. And you have to look at, socioeconomic issues, geographical issues. All of those things impact a parent's ability to give something back to the child. And I think, and again, I believe that change starts at a local level. You can look at national trends and you can look at state trends, but I think we have to look at what's going on here in Greenfield and Franklin County and looking at, okay, if parents are having issues in terms of connecting with their children in a meaningful way, why is that? What's preventing that from happening? And I think that's the first step. I am not a parent, but I was a beneficiary of excellent parenting. But my parents were in a position to be parents. So that's the first question. What's preventing that from happening?
And I would like to chime in on the last point here. I want to give sort of an inverted response to my first response, which is I don't think this is about small dispersed solutions of let's get nature programming into our curricula and let's take away the iPhones. I think there's so many things in our society that's set up structurally against people having connection to nature and the land, and so many things to keep us small and myopic. Just the redundancy going against that initiative is outstanding. And so I would say for this one, this is the root cause, and that's about worldview. And the need for a worldview shift is the primary issue that will move all other issues forward in terms of the younger generation connecting with the land.
On that note, which I think is a very good one, I'd like to once again thank the panel for all the hard work they put into this and the information that they provided all of us. So I'd like to have us all. And I have a lot of gray hairs, and I am probably not going to see 2050, but, or if I do, you're all going to be helping me see it real well. But there are some young people here from the Pioneer Valley Performing Arts Charter School who are going to be seeing it and have thought this through and have thought about what they think 2050 is going to be for them. And so I'd like to introduce Alana Morris, who is a senior at the Pioneer Valley Performing Arts Charter School and has been singing since she could talk. And she loves to sing and has a passion for social justice, and integrating her music and social justice is something that is very important to her. She'd like to thank everyone for coming out today and for creating some positive conversations about our environment and the progress to a better world.
This is a song I wrote. It's called Take a Moment. Ready? Right. Here we go. Ready? Grew up in a town not too far away. I was taught by my mom at an early age. This earth is the one that to us, so tread tenderly and treat it with love. Wasting our time burning fossil fuels, with money worth spent sending our children to school. So let's take this moment to wipe away our pride, 'cause it's not about you and it's not about me, it's just about tonight. So let's take this moment to open our eyes, 'cause it's not about this and it's not about that, it's just about this world that we live in. Didn't take long before I knew what this meant. My time on this earth would soon be short spent. Coal to produce electricity, carbon dioxide and gas gasoline. See, there is this thing we call climate change. The right-wing conservatives think it's a game. So let's take this moment to wipe away our pride. 'Cause it's not about you and it's not about me, it's just about tonight. So let's take this moment to open our eyes. 'Cause it's not about this and it's not about that, it's just about this world that we live in. Refuse to believe what's presented in fact. They cover with lies and they turn their backs. I've been conflicted in life about opening my eyes, but I've chosen my battle, and it's time for me to fight. Thank you.